Jaime Reyes, the third Blue Beetle, and arguably the coolest. And that's no shade against Ted Kord or Dan Garrett, who also have their own moments. But the way in which Jaime is introduced and the changes that they make to the lore of the character really add something extra to the Blue Beetle concept. The Blue Beetle at that point is really taken to the next level, and the Jaime version was the one that would make the leap more into mainstream consciousness through cartoons and later a movie. But just who is Jaime Reyes and what makes him stand out? I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics. In order to examine that, we need to go back to his origin, and that means taking DC back to one of its favorite things, a crisis. Jaime Reyes first debuted in Infinite Crisis number 3 in 2006. He was created by Keith Giffen, John Rogers, and Kelly Hammer. Infinite Crisis was the event that saw the return of the multiverse, and there was quite a lead up to it. Now, while Jaime debuted or was shown in issue 3, he wouldn't become the new Blue Beetle until issue 5. First, we would find the Scarab, or rather would fuse to him, and then eventually it would become clear what it was. The Scarab would activate and envelop him, and also he would be able to communicate with it, creating an entirely different dynamic from previous Blue Beetles. That latter part would be highlighted as Jaime went on. At the start, he was incorporated into Infinite Crisis as a key player since he was able to use the suit to see Batman's rogue tech brother Eye. Jaime's creation stemmed directly from the decision to kill the second Blue Beetle, Ted Kord. At the time, Ted was the more well-known Blue Beetle of the Blue Beetles who had been, but he was no longer being as actively used, and had gone through a significant time period where some viewed him solely as comic relief. He had also had some health issues which left some, including at the editorial level, feeling that he shouldn't be a superhero anymore. Now, as the canon stood, Ted Kord had taken over the role of Blue Beetle from his mentor, the first Blue Beetle, Dan Garrett, who had a mystical artifact scarab that he was able to get some superpowers from. Now, Ted was never able to get the scarab to work, and so instead he themed himself around it from a visual standpoint and became a tech-based hero. The brutal death of Ted Kord and the revelation of the machinations of a fully revealed as villainous Maxwell Lord are an iconic comic book moment. And while not everybody agrees with the death of Ted Kord, it is one of the stronger comic book deaths. And it's a pretty devastating one. Granted, much of the sting and weight has faded over time, for like so many characters, thanks to crises and reboots, Ted Kord got better and is back in the main canon. Now in 2023, Blue Beetle is getting a film, which has caused people to talk about this period in history. Dan Didio has had a lot to say on the creation of Jaime Reyes. At the time, he was vice president executive editor at DC Comics. And I have some of the quotes. He stated, "Now I knew I always wanted to kill Ted Kord." Just side note, there's so many characters that Dan Didio wanted to kill. Just confirmation. I needed a death that mattered to fans, and given his past storylines, overweight with a heart condition, I felt he was past his prime as a superhero. I was working on a plan to slowly diversify the DC universe. So I wanted a new Blue Beetle, younger, more in line with his original creator, Spider-Man. And I thought he should be Hispanic, and I liked his origin to be centered around the Scarab. Now, this isn't the first time that DC has tried to kind of get their own Spider-Man. Firestorm was such an attempt. Kyle Rayner was another attempt, Sideways, Jaime a little bit, it keeps happening. Now, Jaime Reyes would be constructed a bit differently from the start, as would the Scarab, and so that would change the stories we could tell with him. As mentioned, the Scarab would bond with Jaime. It would be revealed to have an alien origin. It would be something that he would have to work with to unlock the secrets of, keep in check. It just opened up an entire new avenue of storytelling, moving it more in a sci-fi direction, while also, because of Jaime's age, allowing you to tell those teenage stories. The costume was also changed to give it a more high-tech look and also have a bit more of a visual cue towards Beetles. Now, the origin change of the Scarab was a clever retcon in that it still incorporated its past history. Now, rather than just being a past mystic artifact, it was an alien artifact. So you could still keep all of the prior history, but now you're just adding on to it. It would also be sentient, adding a whole other dynamic to play with. Now the story went that the Scarab simply hadn't been compatible with its prior hosts, but it was with Jaime. It would turn out to be from a race called the Reach, a race of alien conquerors who created the Scarabs to gather data on worlds and prepare them for conquest. And that idea has been picked up in different adaptations. They've really played with the Reach. And this concept of this young man bonding with this mysterious alien entity, only for it to turn out that it's a bit more deadly than it first appeared. And yet they're able to bond and each change each other. They're fun ideas to play with. The concept of the Reach allowed for several things: a mystery as to power levels, source, origins of the Scarab, and just new types of adventures for Jaime. It would allow him to be a different type of legacy character. For yes, he had something of Ted Kord's, a physical link to the past Blue Beetle, but also it was different. It was taking him in a different direction while not disregarding or dishonoring the past. I would argue that also holds true for his New 52 origin, and in fact in that canon he is eventually driven to seek Ted Kord out. He was in the past as well, but that was just information about him because, well, he did. Jaime was also, as mentioned, being handled on the creative side by Keith Giffen, who had done a lot of work popularizing Ted Kord during the 80s and the JLI era, sometimes known as the blah-ha-ha era of the Justice League, but it also went on and got more serious, and it seems like a lot of people don't remember that part. His involvement meant that a lot of what went on in terms of the transitioning between the characters was handled with respect, even though some don't feel that Ted getting shot in the head was respectful, but that's a conversation for another time. In general, attempts were made to integrate the character gracefully. On his creation, Didio further stated, "The first stop was easy. Keith Giffen. He was a creative visionary of DC Comics for over a decade, and one of those responsible for making the original Blue Beetle a comic book cult classic, along with Booster Gold. Keith, whose wife was Latina, took the assignment primarily because the character was Hispanic, and he wanted this character to be done properly. But he wanted to make several changes to the loose ideas we had in place. Keith named the new Blue Beetle Jaime Reyes, placed the story in El Paso instead of New York, and most importantly, moved the story away from being mystical and made it science fiction." Now, all of these things would be part of what helped make Jaime stand out. He also started out the gate with a big and strong supporting cast, and while at first it would seem like he was going to embrace the secret identity trope, he very quickly disregarded it and became one of the rare characters whose friends and family were in the know and helped him out, which again gave him a bit of a unique feel. It also moved him in a different direction from the Spider-Man archetype that they were trying to go towards, in a good way. And he was also still able to maintain that wide-eyed wonder of being a new superhero, but there was also a bit of a danger element because of the mystery surrounding just what was the Scarab actually. It also made it more rewarding when eventually him and the Scarab would come to an understanding. There was a lot of planning that went into this version of Blue Beetle. DC wanted him to work. They were trying for another fresh crop of heroes. Every few years, or a couple of decades, they do that. Some of them land, some don't. The most successful transition has still been the Silver Age and has not been fully duplicated. Now, Jaime was always intended to spin off into his own solo series, which he did. The initial series would last for 36 issues before its cancellation, and Didio would say while they had high expectations, the book lost its audience. While that may have been the case, Jaime left his mark. While none of his individual solo series really seemed to be able to stick, the idea of him had taken hold, and in general he had been well received. People liked the look, they liked the character. He was presented in a very approachable and likable manner. He was interesting, had a unique personal life and an intriguing relationship with superheroing for a variety of reasons. How it was thrust upon him, coming into a legacy he didn't ask for, but was still something that he strove to embrace, even if he had to take it in a different direction because of the very nature of the Scarab. He could genre shift and play in sci-fi or just your more standard superhero adventure. This opened him up to different avenues and lore in the DC universe. When it comes to Jaime, everything together really made him stand the test of time, and he continues to be doing so. He also now coexists with a living Ted Kord, which works out just as well if not better than with a dead Ted Kord. Living Ted now gets to take on a mentor role as well as an inspirational one, both in the main canon and outside. And just after how he was being talked about, like, oh, he had a heart condition, he was over the hill, you know? Justice for Ted. While Jaime may not have found the firmest long-term footing in comics, he did make the leap into adaptation, and that leap, if it happens and is well received, can really catapult a character into the mainstream consciousness. Side note, he keeps popping up in comics, surviving the various crises, and is now the incarnation that tends to be sought out. So even if he doesn't have an ongoing, he's well established there as well. He'd be adapted as early as the Smallville era in the 2010s, but he would really come to stand out in animation when he appeared in Batman, the Brave and the Bold, and would feature in a number of episodes. And it wouldn't just be him, it would also be his friend Paco, his origin, an ode to the death of Ted Kord, plus the Reach storyline, giving new fans essentially a crash course in the character and a very likable Jaime. For some, this may have been their first introduction to the character.
Still trying to figure out the on button for this thing.
He also had a very fun relationship with Batman in that series, where it was kind of like a mentor-mentee relationship. Because, well, it was Batman, the Brave and the Bold. The whole thing was Batman teaming up with people for most of the episodes. They also played with a similar dynamic in the Justice League action cartoon. That was part of, but not all of why some were baffled by the addition of that one line at the end of the Blue Beetle trailer, the first one.
It's like Batman stuff.
Batman's a fascist.
It's one of those, but why though moments. It's not as endearing as it may have been meant to be. It's a conversation starter. That's not always a good thing though. I can tell it's meant to be a joke, but depending upon one's expectations or experience with various parts of the fandom, they may not be in the mood. Mostly what I noted was look at the Blue Beetle costumes. The costume department is really trying. It's noted and appreciated. Now he would also feature in season 2 of Young Justice once more for the Reach storyline.
Little brother, one way or another, I'm putting you back on mode. You are of the Reach and cannot escape it.
This means that the character also boasts a recognizable and adaptable story that people like to see and take their own approach to. And that's important because it means that there's an identifiable link and arc that people relate to with the character. Because some characters float around and one can't say a single distinct thing about them or the stories they've been in. So that kind of thing can really help in building staying power. While his diversity was an intentional addition to the character, it was done in a way that accented and added to him. There's a genuineness to it and a desire to have the character resonate. While pragmatic, it's not cynical, and there's a real effort put into it, and it pays off. Jaime came across as a well-rounded, unique, and fun character. He ended up, in essence, being cool. Blue Beetle may have been well-liked, but Ted Kord was not a cool character. He was more of a nerdy character. With Jaime, you have not a hip teen, but you have a teen character who's approachable, who's nice and has strong connections to his family and friends, who has a really nice-looking alien tech-based suit, which it cannot be understated how big of a role the look plays. He can go off in space adventures, he can fight with other superheroes, but then he can also have these more relatable storylines as well. Unlike Ted, he's not a character who some felt was derivative of Batman, and he's also not like Dan Garrett with a level of mysticism that doesn't always translate or play as well. Jaime felt updated in a way that felt true to the legacy of the character and honored it even as it moved him in his own direction. It gave him room to chart his own course while not entirely divorcing him from what came before. There's room out there to enjoy all the Blue Beetles, but Jaime Reyes definitely has some of that cool factor on his side. What do you think? Is Jaime the coolest of the Blue Beetles? Or no, he needs to sit down. Ted Kord all the way, or none of them are cool. Who's your fave Blue Beetle and why, or why not? Share your thoughts down below. I want to hear them. While you're down there, please do YouTube things like share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time today to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.